I met the president, introduced by the king, who said, former cabinet minister, partner of the foreign secretary. I thought he was going to say host of the Political Currency podcast, but he didn't. So we are back and remote. I am recovering this morning from a late night dash back from Windsor. Arrived back about 1:45 in the morning. I remember you saying about how these state banquets went late. They definitely do. And you, I think, are abroad.
I was just wondering whether Carstens came in with some kind of Alka-Seltzer in the morning to nurse your hangover. Now you live this kind of Downton Abbey lifestyle.
There were lots of people in slightly more military uniform than Carstens, but it was look. It's such a Rolls-Royce professional machine. Amazing.
And you're probably taken home in a Rolls-Royce, given your new lifestyle. But I'm
Definitely
here in
not.
I'm in the Bavarian Alps, which are unbelievably beautiful today in the sunshine. I'm in a great big kind of Schloss hotel, which I imagine must have been used for lots of sort of G7s and G20s. Anyway, at a conference of essentially kind of European businesses and political leaders and some Americans too. Not many Brits, as far as I can see from the guest list. But I guess I'll be taking the temperature of the continental European economy here in the beautiful countryside around me. I want to start with, come on, we're like the little kids with our noses pressed to the glass as we see how the other half lives. You were at the state banquet. I want to know, did you say hello to Donald Trump? I want to know what you ate. I want to know what you drank. I want to know if you other interesting people. Come on, we want the whole inside story. Come on, spill the beans.
As the House Martins said in that kind of famous album, our faces pressed against the window looking in to see a bunch of bankers. And there were rather a lot of bankers there, but also quite a lot of AI tech executives. It's the second ever state banquet I've been to. And the first one we talked about when President Macron was here. I mean, the first time you go, you're sort of so worried about, did I find the right place in the seating plan? And have I stood up at the right moment? But actually, I think, the thing which is...
That's what the British establishment does, Ed. It takes lefty radicals like you, and it gets you all worried about like whether you're picking up the right fork or the right knife. That's how we control you.
Look, the true patriots have always been, on the Labour side of the political spectrum, I have to say. But no, it was. I think my second time was a chance to take it in and to not simply be worrying about all the things happening, but actually kind of feel it. One of the things which is really kind of emotional now is at the end of the dinner when the pipers parade round the table and play the bagpipes from one of the regiments. I can't remember which regiment it is. I probably could look it up and tell you. It was from the 1st Battalion, the Scots Guard. And
are you looking at one of the kind of swanky documents you got given?
I was looking at the seating plan, and the thing is, because of the passing of the late Queen and that amazing image at the end of the funeral of the lone piper playing. Nowadays, when you hear the pipers, I mean, it's actually very emotional, very moving. Although one of the people I spoke to at the dinner said to me she was at a state banquet and the person she was sitting next to produced this funny thing from their pocket at a key moment in the dinner and pressed a button, and she didn't know what it was. And it turned out to be a remote control for his hearing aid, which he used to turn down the hearing aid as the pipers passed because they were so loud. The pomp and the ceremony, beautiful table decorations was it's brilliant to see.
And Trump, come on.
I met the president, introduced by the king, who said, former cabinet minister, partner of the foreign secretary. I thought he was going to say host of the Political Currency podcast, but he didn't.
But
I
we
said
think
also,
the royal household, I mean, not saying our head of state, but the royal household, there are some fans there of political currency. I should, by the way, have mentioned on my way here the pilot.
Anza, you just cut me off on my key anecdote about Donald Trump. I was about to say the king
We'll come back
turns
to
to me and
the
says,
fans of the podcast. Go on.
introduces me, and I say, but also I say, presenter on Good Morning Britain, and Donald Trump, because he likes a TV presenter, then beamed and said, excellent. So there we are. But you are right. There were quite a few fans. And also, you remember in August, we talked about speech making in one of the special episodes and praised the speech writing of the King and also for the late Queen, how brilliantly, authentically judged those speeches are. And that had made, a few people in the staff very, very pleased to see that their contribution recognised. So that was kind of good to know. The interesting thing, though,
I should say, Ed, I did promise the pilot on my BA flight, Darren, this morning, who is a massive fan of the podcast, that I would mention him. And he actually came up to me and said, "I love the podcast," as he turned off the engines in Munich this morning. So
can I ask, what has that got to do with the King,
nothing.
Donald Trump, the state banquet, or anything?
Just all people in positions of authority, whether they're flying
Total
us
non sequitur,
or guiding our country, are listening to this important conversation we're having. Well, maybe not so important. We need to get on to the important bits. Go on.
We do.
Sorry, I keep interrupting you. Go on.
You do.
Go on.
Thank you, Darren. The truth is, though, on one level, you will totally recognise this. When you are part of a foreign delegation at a big event, in this case in Windsor Castle, and we've many times been, kind of visitors in, Blair House in America or in Tokyo or whatever. Politics is also unfolding at the other end. And you can sort of see the conversations and the phones and that, it's not the case when you are accompanying the president to a state banquet in Britain that all politics and activity at home is suspended. And actually, the most dangerous time politically can be when you are diverted. And you can sort of see from what was happening around the room, politics was still unfolding in America. On the speeches, though, the King's speech was typically excellent. Donald Trump made a really good speech, and it was very passionate in talking about Britain and his family links and the King and Prince William and Catherine and, the depth of the relationship. If Keir Starmer's strategy, look, there's a press conference happening later today. And, as somebody said to me, when the cameras turn on, it always becomes more risky. But the reality is, if the strategy was to use pomp, circumstance and this state visit in order to kind of bind Donald Trump as far as he possibly can into the importance of this relationship, the economic relationship, the tech relationship, but also the political relationship, last night worked as well as they could have possibly hoped.
I mean, isn't that the kind of irony that when people were looking at this autumn, they were saying, oh my gosh, this state visit from Donald Trump is a real problem for Keir Starmer. There are going to be protests. It's going to be very unpopular. He issued that invitation to come when he was sitting in the Oval Office, and it kind of served its purpose. But now he's actually got the visit, and it's going to be a bit of a nightmare for him. And quite the reverse has turned out to be the case. This has been the lifeboat for him, because he's had a torrid week, which we're about to come on and talk about. But in fact, he's able to pivot into being the Prime Minister on the big stage with the American president. He's able to announce, significant investments by big American tech firms who are all traveling with him. And he's able, in fact, to play, I think, his strongest card as Prime Minister. I think if you were to say, if you're trying to be objective and say, what has Keir Starmer done really well as Prime Minister, the handling of the Trump administration would be, well, certainly probably be my top choice, and would be a lot of people's top choices. Whether you like, I guess the question is he paying a price for the way he's handling Trump? But in terms of the objective he set out, which was to engage with Trump, to try and secure economic benefits from that arrangement, that engagement, job done. And the state visit is turning out probably to be the highlight of his autumn. I don't want to guess that things are going to get worse for him between now and Christmas, but they probably are. And so you may look back on that last night and say, well, that was the high point of the second half of this year.
It's true, and it is in contrast to what we saw in the run-up to elections from Mark Carney, now the Canadian Prime Minister, who ran against Donald Trump to become the Premier in Canada. Anthony Albanese in Australia, very critical of Donald Trump and his opponent in Australia for being too pro-Trump. And then here in Britain, we've had over the last few days Ed Davey, the Lib Dem leader, boycotting the state dinner because in protest at Trump and what's happening in Gaza. You had Sadiq Khan, the mayor of London, full frontal attack on Donald Trump in the front of the Guardian on the day of the state dinner, in which he says, these actions aren't just inconsistent with Western values; they're straight out of the autocrats' playbook, talking about some of the things which have happened in America. Ezra Klein, the very well-known American columnist, wrote a piece a week or so ago and be very influential in American politics, saying that the Democrats have now got to take on Trump. What he's doing in America is so shocking, and that they oughtn't to be agreeing a budget deal. They should be shutting down the government in protest. But here in the UK, Keir Starmer is sticking to the strategy which he set out, which is not to be slavishly devoted. I mean, I think if it was Nigel Farage or Kemi Badenoch hosting the president, it would be different in tone to Keir Starmer. He's willing to sometimes say things where there's dissonance, some criticism. We may see some dissonance and some criticism in the press conference this afternoon. But fundamentally, the line he's walking is that by staying close to the Americans and to the president and a cooperative relationship, he hopes to get better outcomes. We didn't get a cut in the steel tariff, but maybe it would have been worse on tariffs. There was a tech deal. Nick Clegg says it's not a very good deal, but what was Nick Clegg doing for the British national interest when he was working for Facebook over the last few years? I'm not sure that we're going to take lectures from Nick Clegg on what is a good deal for Britain when it comes to the tech world. But what Keir Starmer is doing is he is not only trying to say this gets me better deals, also, as you say, it allows him to say, I am the serious, unflappable guy who, in a grown-up way can do proper politics. I think the really interesting question for me is how long? I mean, it's a long time between now and election day to walk that tightrope. And, you remember Theresa May getting into trouble when Donald Trump in the first term suddenly did the Muslim travel ban when she's in America. And when it's something which he does, which is international, at a certain point, that could put acute pressure on the British Prime Minister. And I guess the closest we've come to that so far was the Zelensky moment, which Keir Starmer handled really well. But how long can Keir Starmer walk this tightrope? Does he have to end up sharpening his position as you get closer to an election? At the moment, though, it feels to me he's sticking with this strategy.
Yeah, I mean, I think the most obvious divergence is going to come, isn't it, on Palestinian recognition next week at the United Nations General Assembly. And it's quite obvious that the British government has sort of delayed making its big announcement on that until after Trump leaves the country, and it may come up at the press conference. It's just an observation on the kind of on these tech giants. I think it's fascinating, isn't it? When these companies first started to emerge, when they were literally being created, the Googles, the Facebooks, and let alone the OpenAIs, which are very recent, a recent company. They were sort of separate from government. They were very West Coast. They were almost sort of anti-government, and they set out their own mission statements of do no harm and so on, and they certainly wanted nothing to do with Washington. And yet now they've become real instruments of American power around the world. So when the American president turns up on a state visit, I guess 30 years ago he would have turned up, wouldn't he, with the kind of head of GE or the head of Ford or the head of Exxon or something like, the oil companies and car companies and so on. And now he turns up with the tech titans, and they are an explicit instrument of American diplomacy because they make these announcements on cue about investments in Britain. And I'm sure if there was a state visit to Paris or Rome or whatever, they'd be making announcements about investments there. I don't know whether Clegg's right. That I'm glad your friendship continues, but I'm not sure that Clegg is right. Whether these are the small crumbs or not. They looked to me like significant sums of money, and maybe they were coming anyway. But if I was doing my old job as Chancellor, I'd be pretty pleased with the announcements this week.
I think the real question for the government is whether they they bend when it comes to regulation, and in particular regulation around content. And I think part of my scepticism about Nick Clegg trying to pour cold water on this deal is he spent the last few years at Facebook lobbying the British government not to do the kind of regulation which the tech companies are now asking to be softened. I hope the government doesn't give ground on that, because that would be the wrong thing to do. But in terms of the wider kind of economic planning relationship and how that translates into jobs on the ground, it may not be stellar, but it's a step in the right direction if they don't pay the wrong kind of cost, if they don't listen to all that Facebook lobbying.